So I started taking the brakes apart. I got the drum off, I got the shoes off, I got the rollers out. They were seized in there. Looks like they haven't been out in a long time. But the new brake shoes will come with the hardware for the S-cams. We've checked the S-cams for play. They're actually very tight, which was surprising. We've got a leaking wheel seal here I gotta take care of. So probably what I'm gonna do now is take these brake chambers off. I'm gonna take them off, take that fitting off first because I'll probably need that air fitting right there, that 90-degree brass fitting. We'll take that off and take it loose in the S-cam, and we're gonna try and clean up everything we can and get ready for paint, but we're not gonna paint until we have our cross members put in place for the drive shaft. There's no sense in it. In fact, I may just wait and paint until I finally cut the end of the frame and put the hitch on the back. So I have all my drilling done. I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse here, so we're just going to get it torn down as far as we can and start building back up. What ideally, I have to set my ride height. Right now, the pinion angle looks really, really severe, but it's because we have jack stands underneath this lower leaf spring, and the truck that this came from, at ride height, that leaf spring is just about level. So that's where we need to be when we set our ride height. There's a whole lot of stuff to go into. We'll get into it later, but right now we're going to tear some stuff apart. This is the passenger side frame rail from the donor. This is where the track bar or panhard bar mounts, and it has this plate that went in like that as a stiffener for extra support there. But as you can see, you know, it's junk. So what we're going to do is put it back in place here, and I'm going to trace it. We're just going to cut out this this section of frame. The frame's slightly thicker by a 1/16. We'll compensate for that in the panhard bar. We'll measure from one side of the axle to the frame, the other side of the axle to the frame, make sure we're centered. That's how we'll adjust it. I flipped this frame over because I figured it'd be easier to get the angle grinder, the cut and wheel in there to cut this out. I should have looked at this a little better. The frame where the panhard bar mounted had 2 small cracks in it. So, you know, rather than cut this out, I could have just built another one out of a piece of plate steel, but you know, by the time I realized it was cracked, I already had it cut out, so you know, just move forward. But I have this propped across that truck frame, and you know, I'm not a very tall guy, so here after a little while of cutting, I actually take it and I put it on the floor and make it easier for me and cut it out the rest of the way. And you'll see here in a minute, we got it cut out. And it came out okay. You know, it'll work. We'll dress it up on the bench grinder. So you see I'm drilling a hole here. There's a couple hairline cracks in this. I drilled the first hole you can see there, and I thought that was the end of it, but I cleaned it up some more to start welding, and I saw it went a little farther, so I'm going to drill the second hole. The purpose of drilling a hole is that if you drill the hole at the end of the crack and you weld it up, it won't continue to crack. So it's supposed to stop the crack. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm using a small grinding disc here. I'm kind of V'ing it out. I want to belly it out so I can get in there deep and get a good weld. Basically, I want to replace the cracked metal with a weld all the way across, and then I want to grind it smooth so you can see what we're doing here. Maybe you can see that crack in there now, right in here. Looks like I need to go just a little bit more on the top right there, but I followed the crack right in here. So we're good. I want to clean this up just a little bit more right in this area. Then we'll do the same thing the other side. I'm going to weld both. This is why I keep these little grinding discs when they wear down, because they're good for small stuff like this. So you see I'm stepping up on the stool here. I got this chucked up in the bench vise, and of course it's a regular workbench, and I can't get up on top of it because, you know, my legs are built too short. So I laid a bead across here. I'm going to grind it down. I'm going to look at it again, touch it up from there. I want to make sure it's a good continuous bead from one side to the other with all the crack filled in completely. This plate is overkill for what I'm going to be using it for. However, if I'm going to put it in, it needs to be right. I've spent a good amount of time on this. You know, hindsight's 20/20. I probably should have just taken a flat piece of steel out of the frame and tray seal one on it and just cut it out and drilled a new one, because I've got about as much time welding this up and grinding it back down and getting it all cleaned up as if the same as if I would have you know, just built a brand new one and drilled the holes. But it is what it is. You know, hindsight's 20/20, of course. So what I'm doing here is I'm laying another weld on each side of the weld that I laid first. So I filled in the groove that I ground out to take care of the crack, and then I run a weld on either side of my weld to strengthen that area and spread the weld. I'm not looking for a new piece of steel. You know, I'm not a welder. I'm just doing whatever I think is going to give us the best results, you know, and this piece of steel has some wear in it. I'm not really concerned about it because you got to realize the truck this came from was a tandem axle road tractor with a GVW of 52,000 pounds. This axle will never see that kind of weight with what I'm going to be doing here. Stuck a fork in it. I'll call that good enough. So I ran my welds into the hole and connected the two. So now I'm filing that down so that it's, you know, the same size hole it was originally. That should do. Good enough. I want to use a flat disc on the edges of this to round them off. I don't want them to be real sharp edges. I like them to be kind of softened up so when you put it against that frame, you don't have a sharp edge up against it. Plus, I need to flapper wheel all the rust off so we get this thing painted up and make it look better. Now just have to prime it and paint it. That tack up. What should we do while we wait for that to dry? Cookies and coffee? Perfect. Alright, so this is the third coat. Before I painted it, I used a primer for rusty metal, and I gave it 2 good coats. So now we get our third coat of paint on here, and I pay special attention to the edges too to make sure they get, you know, a good coat of paint. So we're going to let this dry. Now we're going to get back over the truck and start taking some of the other stuff apart. I want to get down to everything's apart now. So I thought I was recording when I took the brakes apart, but apparently I wasn't. And the whole reason I'm taking the brake part is, 1, I wanted to inspect them. 2, we need to take the hub off anyways because the driver's side wheel seal is leaking, the passenger side is damp. So rather than put it together and have to take it back apart later, I just want to go through it. You know, it's hard to make the time to do this kind of project, so when I am doing it, I need to do it as full as I can, the best I can, so hopefully I don't have to touch it again. And this is no different. I thought I was recording, apparently I wasn't. So what I did was I took and backed off the slack adjuster a little bit so the brakes would basically compress and get a smaller diameter, because the brake drums had a pretty good lip on it and I couldn't get the brake drums past them brake shoes. So I backed them off so they came in and basically collapsed, and then they were stuck on the hub, so I took a sledgehammer and I beat on the mass of the drum, not the hub face, but the outside of it, and it popped loose and I could get them off. Now, normally I wouldn't do that if I was going to reuse the brake drums. These I'm not going to reuse. They've got a pretty good lip in them. We're just going to order up new brake drums. So we're going to do brake drums and brake shoes, the hardware, and a bunch of other crap. But anyways, so I go to take this apart. The rollers that the brake shoes set on behind the axle on the bracket were frozen. I had to put a little bit of heat to them, use an air hammer, real gentle like, got in there and got them out. Didn't hurt anything, thankfully. These brake chambers I'm working on now, we've got to remove them because they don't have a provision for a parking brake. On an air brake system, what you have is, with the absence of air pressure, there's a spring inside a dual chamber brake chamber, and one is what's called a spring brake. That spring brake, with no air applied, it will keep the brakes applied so that the truck hopefully doesn't move if the brakes are adjusted well. It takes 60 pounds of air pressure to overcome this spring. So, seeing how this truck doesn't have that, we wouldn't have a parking brake. So I need to change these out. Now, you don't have to do anything special to the S-cam. It will accept it on this axle. So we're just going to change them out. So we'll have the spring brake and then what's called the service brake, which is service brake is what you have when you press the pedal on the floor. These brake chambers fought me. I should have just cut them with a torch, cut the nuts off and been done. I don't know why, but I took wrenches and got them loose and all this. And the one you see now, on the driver's side, the pivot pin that comes from the fork off of the brake chamber to the slack adjuster, the pin was frozen in the fork. So I had to use a torch, and I cut the fork loose from the brake chamber so that I get the slack adjuster out of the way so that I could get to the nut holding the brake chamber, and I hope that wasn't too confusing. I end up getting it, not a big deal, and we can move on from there. But while I'm under here looking, I'm looking at some other stuff, and I'm trying to work a couple steps ahead while I'm doing this mindless work, these things that are just kind of basic stuff. I'm going to show you the clutch fork part here, and you can see what I'm talking about, what was froze up. This pin right here is froze up, so we're going to take it to the bench vise, see if we can get it out. Alright, I was able to get that pin out with no troubles at all. It's pretty quick. Now I'm taking the axle nuts off of that. You see the end of the axle there. You take those nuts off, there's some washers behind it, and then there's these cones. They're like wedges, and they go and seat inside the flange of the axle. And sometimes they're difficult, sometimes they aren't. This is very rusty. You can see the rust coming off of the studs as I'm backing off. And this has not been apart in a very long time, and I struggle with this. I get all the nuts and the washers off with no troubles whatsoever, but them cones will not move. Sometimes I can take brake parts cleaner, like it's silicone that's jammed in there. I can take brake parts cleaner and spray it in there, and it'll start to dissolve the sealer and make it come out. Other times it's rust, so sometimes the cones have a split in them so that they can compress. So sometimes I can take and just stick a screwdriver or chisel down in that split, and they'll come loose and pop out of there, but not the case. I end up soaking these in PB Blaster quite a while and beating on them, and I end up using an air hammer and just breaking them loose and getting them out of there. the way it's supposed to work is you take a little hammer and you smack the end of this like I'm going to do, and the cones would pop out. Here the cones are in place. I work on it for a while. You can see it's wet with blaster. I got all the cones out. One point is when you go to do this, it's best to leave the nuts on the studs, so when you pop this loose, your cones, when they pop off, they don't go flying everywhere. Ask me how I know. A couple hours of looking for them little cones out in gravel. Yeah, mistake, lesson learned. But we got it apart, all went well, so hopefully the other side isn't as bad, but it was. Once we get these axles out, I set them off to the side and clean them up real good so they'll be ready for the reassembly. But once they're out, that exposes the axle nut, the actual nut that's there to hold the bearings in place, which hold the hub in place. Now this axle has what's called axle locks. It's a brand name of axle lock, and what it is one single lock with two flat spots on a nut with basically two pieces of spring steel that snap in, and they go against the flat pieces on the nut, and that's what's supposed to stop it from coming loose. I gotta tell you, I'm not a fan of that. You're putting a lot of faith in them two little pieces of spring steel. I prefer a different style where you have, once you slide the axle out, you would see a nut. The nut there is typically, a lot of times, torque between 200 and 300 pounds. I mean, they vary, so you want to check all your specs before you do any of this. But you take that outer nut off, and then there'd be a lock plate washer. And that lock plate washer would have a tab on it that slides over the spindle of the axle and keeps it from moving. And then it had a bunch of holes in it all the way around. And you would put that in the keyway, and what it would do is line up the inner lock nut, which you would put that on, and it adjusts your bearing preload. And then you would line it up close to the closest hole in that lock plate washer. And that's what would hold it all. So the first nut would set your bearing preload, the washer would lock it into place so it couldn't move, and the second nut is your jam nut that keeps it from coming loose. I prefer that over these. Maybe just my inexperience and not knowing and not experiencing, seeing these a lot. I just feel more comfortable with the other one. I'm looking at the bearings here because what we're going to do is pull out the inner bearing, pull out the outer bearing, inspect them closely. There's a little bit of pitting on the cage of these, but it's not bad. The bearings look really, really good. I'll let that drain out for a little while. Bunch of gear oil in there. So this sets in this little hole right there, and that goes under it, and that's what's supposed to stop it, huh? It's got a keyway right here, and as this comes around, these little springs right here hold this from backing off. They're just spring loaded. See how that just kind of pops off of there, like so. And that one pops out, and then once it gets to where you want it, I mean, it would be more positive snap when this is tight, but I just don't have a lot of faith in that. Yeah, I'm just I can't say as I'm a big fan of that. I'll see if we can't change it back over to the old style, or to the other style, whatever it's called. Apparently there's a special socket to use with this. I'm just not a big fan of that at all. Well, that's going to make a mess, and I have to knock the back seal out of it. So this is going to drain for quite a while. I'm going to go to the other side and take it apart. This is the easiest way I know to get the seals out of the hubs. I put the drum on the ground, put the hub in the drum upside down, take the fork of the grate off, put some down pressure on the hub to hold it so it won't move, take a pry bar under the seal, and then pop it up. That way I can get it out. Now I'm looking at the race. I want to clean it up real good, make sure I don't see any spots where it's dull, what would mean like the finish is coming off and it's worn, so the races need to be replaced. Got to check them all. There, we get it all apart. I got the hubs all cleaned up. I went through and cleaned through all the ABS reluctor. Make sure there's not a crack anywhere, because if there's a crack it'll spread and the ABS will go haywire, give you false readings. But I want to make sure I cleaned it up good. That way if we have trouble with the ABS, I'll at least be comfortable it's not this. Now I want to work on cleaning up the sealing surface. You can see the shiny spot of the hub right there. Of the spindle where the hub seal actually rides, and there's some rust buildup behind it. It's not on the sealing surface, but it's behind it, and I want to get that all cleaned up because I don't want that to stop the seal from going where it needs to go, and I certainly don't want that rust to keep growing and encroach into the sealing surface. So I clean it up the best I can. I like to use emery cloth and PB Blaster combined. The PB Blaster breaks down the rust as the emery cloth knocks it loose. It really seems to do a fairly decent job. Then I take brake parts cleaner and I'll go around it, and I want to inspect that surface. I want to make sure there's no gouges, no scratches, no worn spots or anything weird going on. If there was something that I thought was going to stop it from sealing well, it's not the end of the world. We can get a repair sleeve. A repair sleeve is basically like a ring. A real thin ring, and you drive it over top of the original sealing surface on the spindle, and then it gives you a perfectly round and smooth surface to set the seal up against. That way we don't do all this work for nothing and put new seals on and there's a groove and it still leaks. So this takes a little while. It takes me a little time to get it all cleaned up to where I'm happy with it, and where I'm comfortable I can put a new seal on and not have any troubles. But we're just about done. Both sides look really good. I don't think we need anything. We'll go ahead and clean everything up now, and we should be able to move forward from this point. So we're apart now. Everything's apart. So it's time to order up everything I need, and then after that we will start wire wheeling, cleaning up everything, getting it all ready to go. I forgot to check this S-cam. This one's got some play in it. I don't think it's enough for me to worry about. Alright, well that's it for this one. We are all apart. I know all the parts that I'm going to order. We're going to get new seals, because that's the whole reason we took two sides apart, is this side was leaking, that side was damp. So we're going to order new seals. I'm going to try and find them let's see, it's a nut, a lock washer type deal, and then another nut. I'm going to try and replace those with the other style. That's a 3 3/16 diameter right there, so I'll have to find that. We need 30/30 brake chambers, seals, shocks, shoes. These brake shoes weren't horrible, they were just rusty and stuck, so I figured it's just better. New drums, and we'll fill it up with gear oil. The airbags, I had a couple off the front, and I took and put air to them with a ball valve on those push to connect fittings, and they held air overnight. I came back and still had the same air pressure in them, so we're going to try them. We still may end up replacing these, I don't know, we'll see. But we're going to try and limit our spending as we can. The ABS sensors, I'm a little leery about. I'm just not sure I'm going to get them things out of there easily. So before I go and destroy them, I'm going to look into them and see what we can get to replace them with, because I may just solder a connection onto this here. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. But that's it for now. There is more I need to do on the frame. I need to cut this cross member out. I need to take the the DPF mounting bolts loose and put them back in place. We're going to have to move cross members and some other stuff, but there's more to come. But we got to get some stuff finished up before we can go much farther. So our next step is, I'm not going to video this, but we're going to wire wheel that axle and suspension and parts all up while everything's apart, so it's easy. And hopefully before we go back together to paint or go back to new parts, we can paint it. I have to set the pinion angle, but I can't set the pinion angle until I get the truck sitting at ride height, and that's going to bring us to something else. So we got more to come. So if you guys like what we're doing, give us that thumbs up. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, guys, and we will catch you on the next one.